A $600 pension 10, 15 years ago won't buy much of anything here today.
And why the millennial generation is starting to give up because they can't afford to get a good job or own a house.
8 million Venezuelans voting for this assembly, saying it's actually less than 3.
It is. And people are going to start rioting in the streets.
Was reported to have asked Putin for military support that would help him stay in power.
We will make America safe again. And yes, together, we will make America great again.
And they ignore him. And 8 more years goes by till Bernie himself finally admits to his sons, hey, I've been running a Ponzi scheme.
Does its dominance mean it can use the alliance for its own ends?
Since 1981, bond yields, also known as coupon rates, have just gone down and down and down.
The Federal Reserve note will be your biggest financial liability.
RTD Live Talk. It's Wednesday afternoon, the 3rd day of the month of October. We are live and running a little bit behind, but running behind is better than being completely absent or not present at all. So we're here, excited to get a chance to introduce a guest who's no stranger to RTD, Mr. Lior Gantz. So before we dive in any further, give it a second so that more people can join us. And then more importantly, the main point of having Lior join us is because he's a well-versed young man who's internationally known and does a good job of covering a variety of subject matter. So want you to get your questions answered. And so once I get my screen up and running correctly, then we can begin this live stream here this Wednesday afternoon. So I'm trying to get the chat up, Lior. Give me 1 second.
No problem.
So far, I have Lou, James, Rafferman joining us. How you doing, fellas? Make sure you guys call in and ask questions directly. That's always the best way to get it done, in my opinion. But let me update this right here, and then we're going to start, Lior, because I know it's evening time where you're located at. So, all right. So, welcome to the screen, Mr. Lior Gantz from WealthResearchGroup.com. Lior, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing excellent. I'm glad to be here and happy to answer questions, both direct and indirect.
Well, the most important thing, Lior, last time we had you on, you dropped a lot of information, and the fact that you are a serial entrepreneur, you have multiple ways of generating income passively as well as actively. And so the last interview, I believe, you laid out 3 or 4 things that was real informative from our audience. So I appreciate that. And so we got 3 months left of the month 2018. There's a lot of things happening on this side of the water. You're currently in Israel, and so I'm sure it's a different scene over there, but I would love to cover some things there as well as what's happening here. But with, say, 90 days left, what are some things that concern you politically, monetarily, financially, markets, dollar? You know, like what are some things that concern you?
So I think the biggest concern right now for savers, for just citizens, individuals worldwide, but I'm talking North America and primarily, the biggest concern right now for them is when will this cycle peak? Mm-hmm. So unemployment is at a very low rates, but the biggest theme that we're seeing, Mike, is the fact that the recovery, the 10-year recovery, did not happen where a rising tide lifts all boats. It just didn't happen. What happened in 2008 was the policymakers, especially the monetary policymakers, so the Federal Reserve, it took the initiative of prioritizing the financial system, the banking system, the insurance companies over homeowners and over individuals. So in order to save the entire system, they favored a certain type of strategy. That strategy helped the wealthy, people with either a large stocks portfolio, a large bond portfolio, or equity in real estate, to recover by 2011. So if you look at pre-crisis net worth and post-crisis net worth for the higher middle class and the wealthy, by 2011 they were fully recovered. So for them, the last 7 years has been not only a recovery but a boom. And then you look at the other side of things, the middle income, and you see that the middle income in the United States has basically separated the two groups. Those who stayed in the middle class by either retraining themselves or just very skillfully moving into 21st century America industry, namely healthcare and high tech. So they work at high-paying jobs, right? And obviously they needed to be retrained for that. So they either went back to school or they work for the big companies in various high labor work. High wage work.
Yeah.
But for the majority of the middle class, they've seen their wages either stagnant or they've been marginalized, either by outsourcing or by automation, or just simply by the fact that 2 or 3 people have been sacked, and now one person does the work of 3.
Right.
So there's a few ways that the middle class is shrinking, and then you have the lower income people that not only have they not seen a recovery, they actually have gone back. So when you see economists or the mainstream media talk about a recovery, and you hear these numbers, you say, oh my God, it's great, right? GDP is at the best ever, and this is an average. So take your right hand or your left hand, right, and put it in hot steaming water. Take your right hand, put it in freezing water, and on average, it's all good, right? You're in gray waters. But this hand is having a hot burn, and this is freezing cold. Yeah. So when you look at an economy like the U.S. right now, you can't look at the average, right? Because if you take a bracket of 1,000 people, the wealthiest, so the 1/10 of 1%, owns the same amount of wealth as the bottom 900. The wealthiest 1 out of 1,000 owns as much equity as the bottom 900. That is an economy that is in a huge wealth gap.
Yeah.
When you have a wealth gap in a market system, which is totally it's totally plausible. In other words, it's not a rare phenomenon, because an economy, a market system, favors people that deliver value, and therefore you can see someone like Jeff Bezos, who earned between 2017 and 2018 $70 billion.
Yeah,
that's just to wrap people's head. That is around $6 million a minute.
Yeah, $6 million a minute. Wow. Yeah. So okay, go ahead. I got another question about that, but go ahead.
Sure. So the biggest concern right now is what will happen in a slowdown when about 200 million Americans did not have the recovery moment. They trust the system even less than they did in 2008. They have zero income, or just enough to scrape by. So zero savings for sure, and zero assets. No emergency fund, no plan B, no parachutes. What's going to happen? And then think about it politically. We're about 2 years away from the next election cycle. How aggressive will the next politician have to be in order to secure the votes of people that are desperate? So when you think about it, 200 million Americans, what will need to be promised to them? And then on the flip side, with Trump's policies right now, isolating America from the rest of the world, is the dollar perhaps only years away from losing its reserve currency role instead of decades away, which many people thought before. Maybe people thought, hey, we have 25 years ahead of us. Well, maybe no. Maybe it's only 7 to 10 to who knows, right? So
yeah, hence the name Rethinking the Dollar. Hence the name Rethinking the Dollar. I believe it's a lot closer than it is far out. So, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think what's important for people to really understand is that the dollar system right now is the strongest system. 6 out of every 10 currency units in the world are dollars. 2 out of every 10 currency units are euros, and 1 out of every 100 currency units is the Chinese currency. So you're not going to see the Chinese currency become the world's reserve currency anytime soon.
Right.
By default, governments still use the dollar because it's simply too problematic to change it right now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean the friction will not start. Now, you don't need an official announcement that the dollar is no longer the reserve currency. You can have friction, and friction can cause, first of all, interest rates on the treasury bonds to rise higher into a point where the interest on the treasury bites into other budget items like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, income security, defense, etc. You see the next president, whether it be Trump or otherwise, saying, hey, we got to cut on these entitlements, or he's going to say, hey, you want to get your Social Security check, stay employed. Show us a pay stub, we'll give you your Social Security check, and let's postpone it by 2 years, right? So they can do all kinds of things. It's not set in stone. These are not laws. These are entitlements. People need to remember that. And therefore, the biggest concern is how will society behave in light of a wealth gap. Mike, I want you to just imagine 3 brothers who inherit a property from their father who died, and the property is out of state for them. Now, these people do not talk with each other. These are 3 brothers that are not in good, they rarely talk. They don't agree on anything. For years, they hate each other. Now they get the call from the lawyer, hey, this property has some back taxes, not too much. There's some bushes overgrown, but hey, with just a little, tender loving care, you can get it up and running and put a renter in there. Then imagine 3 other brothers, very good friends. They barbecue every weekend with each other. The families are good. They go in the lake and everything like that. Their father died. They inherit 12 properties scattered throughout the U.S., and they're all in run-down condition. I mean, it is a professional who needs to take care of these. Now, this is two hypothetical Americas. And in the scenario of these 3 brothers, they don't talk with each other. It takes them about a month to have the nerve to call up each other. Then it takes them about 2 months to stop hating each other. And then 3 months to finally get this out of the way. And then another 3 months to actually, fly in and take care of this property. So in 9 months, they fix one house and they have this property ready.
Yeah.
The other 3 brothers, they devise a plan within the day. They start calling contractors. They get all this stuff out of the way. In 1 month, they have the 12 houses rented. This is how a united country gets a lot of stuff done, no matter what the issues are. And this is how a divided country gets nothing done because they're socially and politically and everything is a problem. So everything is a hassle. And this is the only real problem, because 2008 made it so that the bankers and the politicians, in Americans' eyes, they colluded. And so the next recession, they'll want to distance themselves. They want to say, hey, we can't be seen to be colluding, even if it's for the country's best interest, that we do 1, 2, 3. So you might see a prolonged recession.
So will it be a pointing game of it's your fault, no, it's your fault type of thing, if they're going to divide and not want to associate with each other in that regard?
I think they will want to make sure that the public understands that, hey, if we're going to be, locking arms, it's because the public wants this. So they're not going to take any tough decisions that might be problematic with the public. They will want public assurance that they're doing the right thing. Now remember, TARP money, bailout money, all that stuff was very unpopular with the public. Right now, they're going to they're going to look at public perception before they do anything. Now, as you know, as a parent, there is such a thing as tough love. So sometimes you need to make choices which are not good. Short term they look bad, but long term they're great. So we're not going to see that this time unless the next president, really is a macho man, and you might get into a situation where you see executive orders and all the stuff that Americans don't like, all the ways of trumping over stepping over the Constitution. So this is the biggest problem Americans face. How will division be dealt with when the slowdown, when the recession, when things grind to a halt.
All right, so.
And I'm not predicting Armageddon. There's a recession. Recessions happens. Every country in the world goes through slowdowns and peaks and troughs, and it just happens.
Right. Now, I can predict or guess that whatever it is, because we have been pampered and living well beyond our means for decades now, so there will be no smooth transition to anything, so that it will be very chaotic and it will be very problematic for a lot of people, given the fact that our population now is 74 million baby boomers. They're retiring. They were promised a lot of things. If they don't receive those promises and they have to go on the workforce, they're going to be pissed. Then you have a lot of young teens that will not have a chance to get into the market force because of student loans, student debt, jobs that don't pay. We're bred to be employees, not entrepreneurs. So I would imagine crime is going to pick up. So there's going to be a inner war, in my opinion, of the older who put in 40 years and the younger who's put in nothing, meeting in the middle. And it will not be pretty. And so I don't think any type of presidential leader can get out there and say, let's rally together. We need to stand together, because we have 3 or 4 generations of different people in between. It's going to be hard to communicate. Hence the idea that a lot of people think that whenever things get chaotic, we look for distractions. Hence what's happening in China, Syria, Russia, to point the blame on somebody else to rally us together. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's a known strategy to blame an outsider, to blame a foreigner. But you know, what's most important is to understand that America, in the 21st century, for it to prosper, it will need to reinvent itself. Now, it's the strongest it's the strongest economy in the world. Still the best place to do business in the world, bar none. So. You know, overall, we're just talking about a situation where the federal debt is out of hand. But private sector, there are some incredible companies and incredible businesses in America. What I think is going to happen, Mike, is that you're going to see what's called a public-private partnerships. You're going to see the government coming in and telling a company like JP Morgan, which is a publicly traded company, you and I can be shareholders of that company, and we can own it, right? We are the owners of it. The management works for us, the board works for us. We're the shareholders, we're the owners, right? So the government can come into them and say, hey, we're rejuvenating the Rust Belt. You have a problem, or we have a problem as a society, where here is a huge city with unbanked people. People that don't have a credit score, people that we want to subsidize 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 20 branches. Why don't you go in there, build a program where you can get these people, apply for a mortgage, etc. You're going to see a public-private partnerships forming in America. So monetary policy, what has been the key thing up until now, right? Slashing interest rates, QE. All the tools of the Federal Reserve will be marginalized because they're out of tools. If you slash interest rates from 3 to 1 to 0 again, it's almost it has literally not a lot of return. Even if you prop up the market right now, a lot of people will not join the rally because it's fairly valued. So in 2009, when you had the most powerful institution in the world telling you, hey, go long equities were behind your back, you had Intel selling at liquidation prices like they're going bankrupt tomorrow, right? The problem wasn't Intel, right? Computer chips weren't the issues in 2008. The banks were the issues, but all companies went down because of panic selling and forced liquidation, margin calls, etc. So the market was cheap. Real estate was cheap. Now it's not true. So even if you prop up asset prices, this is not going to be another huge rally. So I think that's important. Debt levels are high. So even if you slash interest rates, you're only promoting bad behavior because CEOs will keep taking on debt. And when you take on debt at the wrong part of the cycle, you can't service it. You can go into liquidation, to bankruptcies, to restructuring your debt. Your share prices go down. So overall, fiscal policy, which we're already seeing, tax cuts, right? That's fiscal policy. Deregulation, that's fiscal policy. and obviously an infrastructure program which Americans have been promised, which I believe will go forward if the Democrats win the midterm.
Yeah.
That's what they'll want. They'll want the infrastructure program. They'll want to put more people to work. That's going to be more on the agenda. How does the government get into this? Now, if you go back to the 1930s in Europe, the last time there was such a wealth gap in the world, you remember that in Germany, for example, before the war, I'm talking like 6-7 years before the war, public work became a huge theme. They built the Autobahn, which is still one of the most amazing roads, highways in the world.
Yeah.
They did all kinds of stuff from but they took on debt to do that, right?
Yeah.
Everything was financed by banks. So that is kind of where you're going to see two balancing acts. Will the American public, or will America be able to finance everything with debt? With telling the world, hey, finance our debt for another decade while we get stronger? Or will the world say, hey, you want us to buy bonds? Higher interest rates, 6 to 7% on the 10-year, and not 3%.
All right,
you
Leo.
want that.
1 second.
So,
okay, sorry to cut you off. We got a caller, so let's get. So hold that thought if you can remember. If not, we'll get to that because we got a lot more coming. So, caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Hey, this is Jeff from Florida.
Jeff from Florida. How you doing, my friend? What's on your mind this afternoon?
Hey, I'm doing good. Hey, I just wanted to touch base and ask Leo a question. I watched some of your recent interviews.
Okay.
And I've been seeing some news articles come up. We saw one a couple days ago from Peter Schiff, and he was talking about, the next recession is going to be worse than the Great Depression. I watched an article on USA Watchdog just 2-3 days ago from Gerald Celente. He was saying the same thing, saying this next recession, when it hits, it's going to be worse than the Great Depression. So I just wanted to ask Leo, what was his impression? When exactly do you think this next recession is going to hit? What's going to be the trigger point? And what should the average person on the street do to prepare for this? Because I'm looking at, big companies filing for bankruptcy. I just read an article today. It was a mattress firm said that they were going to be filing for bankruptcy soon. And I just think we're going to have a string of mass layoffs soon. So what should the average person do to prepare during this event?
All right, thanks for that call. Appreciate you.
All right, thank you.
All right, have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So I think, first of all, that the potential for what Peter Schiff and Celente are talking about is it's a possibility, right? You can never know how a recession works out, and this is why I gave the analogy of 3 brothers who can't handle one house and 3 brothers who handle 12 houses, right? So you might see a recession where America's issues are or America's politicians and bankers and public are so divided that it takes longer to solve. It's prolonged. The stock market suffers more, etc. And companies have to, when there's uncertainty, companies don't like to hire. If anything, they like to lay off or put people on temporary leave, or etc. But what's important to also remember is that there's so many companies out there that are in good shape. If you take a look at the S&P 500, companies are not indebted as a group. Many of the best companies in America have a lot of cash, and they can grow their business if the need arises, right? And we do live in an international world, so many U.S. companies have most of their income derived from other countries. McDonald's, about 70% of their income comes from Europe and Asia. Just think about that, right?
Really.
McDonald's, you thought, hey, everything is American. No. And so you have to think about the problems, Joe. I'm talking Joe, Florida, right? So you have to think about the problems for the federal government and problems for the private sector. The private sector is not suffering through a huge debt crisis. There's a debt crisis for students. There's a debt crisis for auto loans. There's a debt crisis in consumer credit card, so what's called a revolving, right? And U.S. households are overweight on the stock market right now, similar to how they were in 2000. So people are hurting into the stock market. But it doesn't mean that the next recession will have to be an Armageddon. If what happened between 2008 and 2018 was a deleveraging of the system. So many of the problems that you saw for the financial sector are not there anymore. There's definitely not a crisis for the banks. The banks have a ton of cash in reserves. Homeowners are not, drowning in mortgage payments. So many of these things that were back then, the trigger points, are not trigger points anymore. It's important to remember that. Now, there was a price to pay for that. There was a price to pay for propping up all the banks and making the banks stronger. The public had to pay taxes, and the federal government needed to get further in debt. Right. So there is a problem here, right? It's not you didn't solve a debt problem and inject capital, out of air without creating a problem somewhere else. Right. Now that problem is the $21.5 trillion worth of federal debt, but that sort of a problem is not an imminent problem. You can restructure debt. You can prolong debt. You can create austerity measures. There's so many tactics and tools that the federal government can take in order to make sure. This is not a private person, Mike. This is not a collector calling Mike because he hasn't paid. This is a federal U.S. government. Yeah. And therefore, the guy on the street. So let's talk about solutions, right? Yeah. The first thing you need to understand is that your wages or your career is top priority. That's the bottom line. You have to really think about where you're employed and whether or not there's an opportunity for you in that profession and in that company. Right. If there is one, you need to really shine. So you really have to do three things. One is to do more than is expected of you. In other words, go the extra mile. So this is something that all employees should do. Be the opposite of your peers, right? Yeah. Be the earliest to come in, the guy that goes home the latest, and come up with ideas. Here's one way to do it. A good friend of mine came to me and asked me the same question. I told him, hey, go to your boss every month, once a month, with an idea to generate revenue for the company. Nobody asks you to do it, just go and do it. The fourth month he did that. The boss liked it so much, he took that program to higher management. Higher management told this person, be in charge of this. Yeah. And they gave him a raise, but obviously they gave him more responsibility, and he had the ability to shine his skills. Approach and initiate ideas for your boss. Very important. So go the extra mile, but not only go the extra mile, but use your personal initiative to do something that nobody has ever told you to do. Just do it. Now, the reason you want to do it is not for the raise. The reason you want to do it is because you want to make your imagination work. Because if they don't like your idea, shop it around to other companies, or just go ahead and do it yourself. Right. Yes. So, and maybe take other people with you. So, in other words, you need to really understand that the wages are stagnant in the majority of the economy, but it doesn't have to be your personal fate. All
right. So, Lior, so we got another question. So, sure. Let me get that question. Hello, caller. What's your name? Where you calling from?
I'm in Ohio. My name's Jeff.
Jeff from Ohio. What's on your mind this afternoon, my friend? What question do you have or thoughts you want to share?
I just gotta wonder how he believes that, there's so many more ways we could create debt. I mean, we've done it for 150 years probably. We haven't even paid off the Second World War in this country. I mean, everything's a sinking ship. I mean, once you run out of things to fill the holes that are punched into the walls of a ship that is sailing, those holes are going to start leaking again.
Yeah, so I agree 100%. So it sounds like the issue is debt. So it looks like we might be reaching a point of complete debt saturation globally. Is that an issue or a concern that can start from beyond just our country but trickle into our country? Is that kind of what you're trying to get at a little bit?
Yeah, and look at all our governments and economies economies are so intertwined that if one goes down, it's a domino effect.
Yeah. So, Leo, what are your thoughts on the contagion effect of say, for example, the emerging markets and everything else? All those issues now being the catalyst for that next market situation outside of the U.S. What's the possibility?
And he said something about how we got trillions of dollars in the banks. The banks invest your money on Wall Street. Come on. That's where all the trillions of dollars are. They're not in the banks.
They're not in the banks as deposits.
The gambling table.
Okay, so Wall Street's a gambling casino. Okay, so Leo, answer the question for us in reference to the contagion effect outside because of debt. Connor, thanks for calling in, my friend. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
So, obviously, and I said this at the outset, the biggest problem is debt. It's the federal debt that concerns more, and the state level debt, not the private. It's not the businesses. Businesses are overall very healthy. Consumer debt is very problematic, and student debt is very problematic. But if you look at companies themselves, businesses, they're not in a problematic situation. Now, with regards to the federal debt, what I said was that there are many tools before the federal government, defaults on the debt. It's not like the U.S. government can say tomorrow, hey, foreign investors, we're defaulting on $21 trillion. It's not going to happen. There are many other tools before this happens for an institution the size of the United States government. Remember, the United States government takes in trillions of dollars in tax revenue. Household wealth, household equity in America is over $100 trillion collectively. So, in other words, if this was not the United States of America, if this was a banana republic, they can nationalize 20% of the private wealth and be done with their federal debt. Obviously, this is not a situation that will happen in the United States, but it's important to understand that foreign investors and foreign governments, they see the big picture. The big picture for them is that the United States, in return for buying their bonds and buying their debt, foreigners get aid. And so it's like this person said, they're all in bed with each other. And of course, all governments today have debts that are between 70 to 100% of GDP. So all governments are ridiculously in debt because they've overpromised. And think of it like a company, right? A company gets profit in and distributes dividend out. And all of these governments, they take taxes in and distribute entitlements and budget items out. So they're on credit, and they are basically leveraging credit. That's all they're doing. Now, that means that they're in debt. And so there's a huge issue and a huge problem, but it's important to understand it doesn't mean that it's imminent and it's going to all fall down tomorrow. With regards to how you can invest in this and how you can protect yourself in this, the one thing that's important to understand is, think of it like the Caribbean islands, right? About 1 month out of the year, there's a huge storm. It doesn't mean that 11 months out of the year, tourists don't flock the Caribbean because there's great weather. And it's the same thing with an imminent recession or a huge debt problem. It doesn't mean you need to stop everything you're doing, hunker down, and just wait for the inevitable. You need to build wealth and have what we call chaos hedges, which is ways of protecting yourself personally from what you cannot control. So you cannot control the debt levels of the federal government. It's just impossible for any one person to change what's going on. As a society, we dictate many things as a collective, but as a personal person, it's almost impossible, right? So, for example, for myself, I took 24 months worth of my burn rate, my lifestyle expenses, just for example purposes. Let's say my family burns $10,000 a month times 24 months. That's $240,000, and I converted that fiat into precious metals in physical form. So that's one thing I have. I have 24 months worth of fiat converted already into gold and silver physical form. It's either in vaults in about 4 continents right now. I'm sorry, and I have some in my main residence. Outside of that, I have a secondary passport. So if there's a problem, there's another country that welcomes me. A third thing that I have is a life insurance policy that I'm able to tap into whenever I want for the cash value of it and still stay insured. It's called a whole life policy. Very different from what the mainstream insurance companies give you. So, for example, Mike, if you were insured and you put like let's say, for example, $100,000 in there, you're insured. That's your cash value. That's not your death benefits, which are much more than that.
Yeah.
But if you need liquid money, you can call tomorrow, get that $100K, and you're still covered if anything happens to you.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's an interest rate attached to that, but you have liquid assets. A fourth thing that you can do outside of that is to have Bitcoin or one of the very dominant cryptocurrencies, because then if there's a huge problem, you can move money around internationally without regulation at this point. So this is an important thing. You need to figure out how much you want to get this done. So these are 4 basic things, but the 5th one is offshore real estate. So if you have offshore real estate and it's a residential property that also has a garden and a farm, then you also are self-sufficient. So there are many ways that you can protect yourself. But underlying all of them is, if you don't have the initial wealth to convert 2 years worth of your life into fiat, from fiat to precious metals, if you don't have the money to buy offshore real estate, if you don't have the money and the education to convince another government to give you citizenship, then you're doomed. So, in other words, the first thing you need to do is take care of your main career, because that's your main source of income.
Yeah.
And so that is the point that I'm trying to stress. Financial education, building wealth, making sure that you do what you need to do, is the most important thing.
Right. Now,
and then you can have these protections.
Sounds good. So I was writing down, the Lior Gant's five chaos methods for the next crash. So 5 methods. So I'm gonna use that as probably the title, 5 methods from Lior Gant's. But
I have a 6th one that's also important. So
go and give it to us.
And then you can recap the 6. if you can, have a duffel bag. Have a duffel bag with physical cash, currency, paper currency. That is in the 5 major currencies that are either very strong or their economies are based on commodities. So, US dollars, euros, Swiss francs, Canadian dollars, and Australian dollars, and have at least 6 months worth of living expenses in those physical currencies. So, that is another layer of protection that you can have. Now, it's up to you where you want to keep that, but obviously, if you have a main residence and it's secured, that's a great place because it's on hand. And if you need to move, then it's a great stuff. Again, if you can't save up 6 months worth of your living expenses, that is your primary concern. How do I raise my living expenses and raise my standard of living right now? And that is what I'm saying is you need to figure out your main career. What do you have that you can offer to the marketplace in the market system that you live in? And if you can't, that's not a problem. So in other words, if you do not fit into the market system in America, think about moving to another country. There are great options in today's world. I've been to 42 countries in my life, and I can tell you that whoever thinks about the world as first world and third world has not been to any other countries. Most countries in the world today, people earn between $10 to $30 a day doing very, very basic stuff. And they live very, normal lives. Now, if you can come in there as an American with the type of ideas and skills that you have, Americans are doing great stuff overseas. In many countries that are what we call now transition countries or second world countries. So that's another alternative for you. But don't expect any easy answers because there are none.
Right. Fair enough. So, Leo, we have a caller. Hello, caller. What's your name? Where you calling from?
Hey, my name James. I'm from Chicago.
James from Chicago. What's on your mind this afternoon?
So, real quick, I heard your guest say that the banks are sitting on a big pile of cash and stuff like that. I checked all the cash deposit ratios for a bunch of the major banks, and Deutsche Bank actually has one of the best cash deposit ratios. I mean, they do have $73 trillion worth of derivatives that could explode at any time, which could be a catalyst for the next event. But nobody, I don't think should keep their money in Deutsche Bank. So with consumer debt,
I was talking about
going to new
American
records,
banks
the
more,
Fed tightening, and everything's selling off. Where do you see the next financial crisis coming from if it doesn't come from debt or lack of liquidity?
Leo, you hear that one?
Yes, sure. And it's a great question. And obviously, with regards to Deutsche Bank or any other foreign bank, I was talking about American banks as before, talking about their reserve ratios, their cash deposits, etc. Deutsche Bank and many Italian banks and many banks in these countries like Spain, etc., are in very big problems, and they do not share the sort of situation that American banks have. But yeah, definitely.
Isn't the cash deposit ratio requirement for the American banks like 2.5% or 2%, something like that? It's real low. It's fractional reserve banking. It's nothing stellar.
Oh yeah, they definitely have more outstanding claims than they actually have reserves, flat out. So
sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We nobody thinks that if there's a huge bank run, then everyone gets their physical currency. It's of course there's of course the inherent problem of the system. So the system only works on the idea that the banks can have more money on hand than people demand out of them. It's James, if that's the question, then the answer is for sure that is a huge problem, but it's inherent in the system. So if you have other ways of banking and saving your money, then that's fine, and you should do that, right? But from where the next recession comes from, one thing that's important to understand is that the next recession comes from tightening cycles. So there has never been at any point during the Federal Reserve's run from 1913 to 2018, there's never been a tightening cycle where they hiked interest rates and shrinked their balance sheet that hasn't ended in recession. And why does this happen? So for one thing, they can mismanage the pace that they hike interest rates, and therefore inflation can rise faster than interest rates, and then they need to compensate. When they compensate, they put the economy at a stall because the short-term interest rates are too high. And what's called it can cause a yield inversion where the short interest rates are way too high. So this is one problem, and it happened many times before, and it caused stock markets to peak. It caused unemployment to top off, and then it causes slowdowns in recession. So that is where it will happen. Now, whether or not it will be a mismanaging of raising interest rates that will cause it, or it will be the fact that they're shrinking their balance sheet, and therefore there are less buyers of bonds. So imagine, Mike, in the last 10 years, the Federal Reserve has bought a lot of the auction, the bonds at the auctions. Now they don't do that anymore. So other foreigners need to come in and buy the debt. If they don't come, then it means that the United States Treasury will have to increase the interest rates that they offer foreign governments for their bonds. If that happens, obviously it creates a problem for the dollar, because in order to run trillion-dollar yearly deficits, you need to print currency, not to do QE programs, but to straight out create currency. When you do that, it creates inflation. The U.S. has never had the problem that other currencies have with major inflation. It had a 2% inflation over 100 years, and therefore the U.S. dollar, in real terms, is about 98%, discounted to where it was in 1913. But you haven't seen a problem like you see in Argentina right now, where it's just runaway inflation, and it creates a huge problem for society. So when it's dripping, it's a different sort of a problem, right?
Yeah.
And you can beat that, right? If your wages rise by 4 to 5% a year, or if your stock portfolio rises by 6 or 7 or 8% a year, then and inflation is 2%, then okay, so what? You're still getting richer every year, right? So that is the problem.
Isn't inflation just a passive default on the debt?
It is. It's a great way to look at it. Yeah, for sure.
Excess tax.
When you inflate the purchasing power of your own currency, when you do that deliberately, you create a situation where it's easier to pay down the debt, the real debt, in real terms. But for a government to decide on a policy that's called a hyperinflation, that is a policy that a government like the United States will James, you will have to see guns in every store, and you have to see America just go berserk before that happens. It's the last thing that a country with 450 million private guns would decide to do.
Yeah.
I don't think we're too far off from running an inflation like we did in the 70s at 10-12%. There's just too much cash out there, and nobody's moving it around. So there's no inflation gauge that we can.
There's no velocity of money.
Yeah.
There's a low velocity of money. That's correct.
And that's on the consumer side, but yeah, I believe the inflation aspect is reflected in all the assets now, with stock market, housing market. That's where the inflation is being portrayed as net worth. So people think their net worth is improving, but that's really the signs of inflation. As the money velocity is not moving nowhere, once that start moving, then we're gonna really feel that true rate of inflation, I believe.
Yes and no.
No. Okay, go ahead.
Yes and no. So there's a difference between prices going up and prices inflating up. In other words, if you go back to 2009, Mike, and you look at the stock market, and you say to yourself, okay, the S&P 500 is X, and now in 2018 it's 4X. You obviously understand that if somebody had $1 million in 2009 and now has $4 million in 2018, that $4 million does buy more goods than $1 million did in 2009. The U.S. dollar is not deteriorated by 75%.
True. So
there is real wealth that was created in the stock market and in the housing market, etc. There is a problem for many Americans who did not participate in this wealth period. So there is a problem with Americans who do not have financial assets or real estate. And they did not participate in this boom, which was caused by the fact that monetary policy favored raising the price of financial assets across the board. In other words, if the monetary policy was to inject capital into the mainstream economy, then you'd have many management teams who would have money to trickle down, to employees, and wages would rise instead of financial assets.
Yeah.
So it's a big difference. And to James's question, the problem will be how the Fed manages or mismanages the tightening period. And therefore, nobody knows where they'll get it wrong. But once they get it wrong, that's where the trigger point will be. Whether it be raising interest rates too fast and therefore creating a situation where there's a debt burden on debtors that took on too much debt, CEOs, etc., and then you start seeing more delinquencies, more liquidation, etc.
Yeah.
Or will it be the Federal Reserve being behind the curve of inflation? Then you see inflation 4 to 5 to 6% using their gouges, And obviously the stock market doesn't like that, because CEOs, if there's a 6% or 7% inflation rate, they can't figure out what to do next. What should I do with 7% inflation? Should I fire employees? Should I hire employees? Should I expand overseas? Should I buy machinery? Should I do this? What should I do? And therefore, if the CEO, if the management of the company is baffled as to what to do, and they can't make decisions, shareholders get panicked and they sell off stock, and a stock market bear market begins. So it all boils down to how will the Fed mismanage their tightening cycle, and then how long will it take the United States government, the private sector, the Federal Reserve, and the public, all these four different entities, to agree on what to do next in order to solve the problem.
Yeah, so it looks like regardless there is a problem coming, we can all agree on that. So caller James, thank you for calling in, my friend. Appreciate you.
Hey, thanks for taking the call.
All right, have a good one.
Wait up.
Yep, get your weight up. I like that. So Leo, one of the things.
What did he say?
So one of the sayings that we have here in RTD is to get your weight up. And so in this digital age, everyone prefers paper and digits. I tell people to accumulate and to get their weight up a little bit with these little things here if they can.
Oh.
So the heavy.
I thought get your weight up so you have more fat in case you starve. Okay.
You might need some extra calories too if there's a logistics problem with the grocery store. So get your weight up in general, because most people are trying to get thin these days. But as we've been about an hour, Leo. It's been great as always. And so I just noticed a couple different people chiming in reference to the cryptocurrency sector. So as I told you prior to going live, that was probably going to be one of the topics people want to cover. So share with us your thoughts on the current state of the cryptocurrency market, blockchain, things of that nature. Do you see a rally by the end of this year? Will it be in the future, or is it what's up with that? What's your thoughts on that?
I think the major cryptocurrencies are not going away. Mm-hmm. But they are having an identity crisis where both the developers and the users are trying to understand where a cryptocurrency fits in. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you can't, right now with existing technology, you can't scale Bitcoin to where a lot of people use it. Mm-hmm. Another problem with it, or not a problem, but another aspect that you need to figure out and understand is that you can use leverage with Bitcoin. Bitcoin and precious metals are the same. They're straight cash, right? They're purchasing power that I move from one hand to another. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, for example, think about you being an event organizer, mm-hmm. and Guns N' Roses are gonna appear next week, and you are putting everything together. There's 90,000 people coming, but you tapped into your entire budget. Mm-hmm. Now you're gonna make a killing if everything goes well, mm-hmm. but right now you're missing about 20 grand. Mm-hmm. What do? You go to the bank, mm-hmm. and you ask for a loan, right? If you don't have anything else. So getting credit is not a bad thing in and of itself. It creates leverage in the marketplace. Yeah. But over credit. So where the problem is that you can't service this debt, mm-hmm. is the problem. But for you, 90,000 people are going to generate such a profit for you that mm-hmm. it's not going to be an issue to pay back the bank. Now, what do you rather do? Go to the bank, get 20K, mm-hmm. get this show on the road, mm-hmm. pay back, you get your profit, you move on, your reputation is great, or tell 90,000 people they need to stay home. So credit in and of itself is not a problem, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is what I call extrapolating the credit. So where in the late part of the cycle, people get greedy and they take on debt that they can't service if a downturn happens. Mm-hmm. So they over leverage themselves, and that is the huge problem with all of these institutions, that they over leverage themselves. Mm-hmm. Now when that happens, it's a societal problem. In 2008, the answer was very unpopular for society. Yeah. But on the flip side, you could have let all these banks fail, and it probably would have created huge problems. Mm-hmm. Just playing mind games with yourself and see where that would have happened. Where about 250 million Americans would not have gotten their pays, right?
Yeah.
Everything would be closed. You'd have bank holidays, no ATMs, probably some military in the streets. So, you got to judge all of these things and understand that when there are hiccups in such a leveraged economy, like the previous caller said, where it's all built on leverage. When you have these hiccups, these are huge issues to concern yourself with, and therefore, I always come back to the main point. You need to get wealthy yourself, and then you can kind of worry about everything else.
Yeah, I do agree. And before you got to that part, I had something to say in reference to, I forgot what came to mind, but anyway, it come to me after the fact. But Lior, it's been great, my friend. We've been over an hour. It's been great. We could probably go for another hour, but it's late there where you're located at, and then the day has to continue to move on for me. So other than that, Lior, anything you want to leave us with? How can those that might be new to RTD, how can they find you, get connected with you, and find out more what you got going on?
So I think, just in a nutshell, if anybody doesn't know my story, is I fell into hardship when I was 13 and my father went bankrupt. So his business went under, and I felt helpless at 13. When the lights went out in the house because the electricity bill was overdue, and then the phone didn't work sometimes, and so I just went to work, right? And what happened to me was nobody wanted to hire me. I was 4'11", which is like a 150 centimeters for those who do centimeters. 13 years old, very very small guy, and I go to this clothing store, and he doesn't want to hire me. And why do I tell people they need to do the extra mile? Because I went there every day for 2 weeks, and for 2 hours a day, I would talk with the owners in the dead hours and show him how much I know about all his brands. And every day I would go home and study more about his brands. 2 weeks later, a woman came into the store while I was there, and I upsold her while just being just standing there.
Yeah.
And he said, "Look, you have some skills." He didn't tell me to sell or anything, right?
Yeah.
I just did it, and that became my wealth accumulation process, right, in life. At 13, $4 an hour.
Yeah.
1997, and then, but it gave me confidence. So I started marketing my services in the neighborhood as a babysitter, and then I told the parents that I babysit, "Hey, what I can teach your kid how to shoot, hoops." I was 13. Your kid is 6. Let me tutor him a little bit on how to do that. So by the time I was 16, I saved up about 20 grand worth of today's dollars. Got my parents to sign a waiver for me to run my own bank account, and started investing when I was 16. And I've been investing ever since and building businesses ever since. And 2.5 years ago, I just said, look, I think the real plague is financial education, or the lack thereof. And therefore we started wealthresearchgroup.com as a free financial newsletter where I can basically transmit my top ideas and my top research and what was going through my mind to our subscribers. And what's nice about our newsletter, Mike, is that not only does the newsletter talk about general stuff, but we actually profile opportunities. In 2016, for example, we profiled 12 mining companies, gold and silver companies. All of them doubled and more. In 2017, we zigged when the market zagged, and we went into cryptocurrencies. We were the first newsletter on the planet to profile Ethereum when it was $12 a coin. It then went on a 9,000% uptrend in 7 months and was trading over $1,000. Many subscribers made a fortune. And in 2018, we zigged again when the market zagged. And that is kind of where I feel that this is like my baby, my passion with the newsletter. If you go to the website and you look at the top menu, you'll see 3 buttons that might interest you for weekend reading. One is called Dividend Mania, where you can kind of look at what Warren Buffett has done and how he has built wealth, and you can start doing the same thing. That's Dividend Mania. You're going to see the Special Reports tab, which is like a huge wealth library of special reports from 16 years worth of and I'm sorry, yeah, from 18 years worth of investing since I was 16, 34 now. And then obviously the newsletter is the best way to stay current with us.
Fair enough. Well, Lior, once again, it's been an honor to have you join us, my friend. Looking forward to checking in with you as we always do every couple months to find out what's going on and get your thoughts. And it's good to have more audience participation now where people can call in and question and challenge and whatnot. That's what it's all about. And then also, namaste. I want to thank you for the super chat. I appreciate that. Definitely have that Bolivar infographic coming out soon for you. So other than that, Lior, it's been great, my friend. Look forward to keeping in touch with you and have a blessed and happy of the rest of this year. We've got 90 days left, hoping for the best for you and your family, and enjoy everything, my friend. Thanks for tuning in with us.
Thank you, sir.
All right, everybody. If you like this, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, share it, as well as up in this corner here. If you guys want to become a patron, feel free to join us. Got my Bitcoin address there. If you want to bless me with some Bitcoin, I appreciate it. Other than that, until we meet again, I'll see you tonight, 9:30 p.m. Peace.